1930, a child was born in the midst of the Great Depression. It's regularly considered that the Great Depression started in 1929, so it was really just getting underway. And in 1930, this child that was born, he and his sister faced a mother who gave them such a hard time that she verbally abused them until they sobbed. Just doesn't seem fair to be born in an impoverished time when the entire country is headed downhill financially. When people were dealing with this great disparity between wealth and poverty, more than 20% of the country was unemployed. That was the unemployment rate, at least 20%. Some sources say 25%. Every 1 in 5 or 1 in 4 people didn't have a job. People stood in long lines just to try to be able to eat. And here's this child, born in 1930, amidst the Great Depression, and a mother who was not kind. Fortunately, just because something starts off unfair doesn't mean it has to stay that way. And if you've ever felt like anything in life was unfair, this sermon is for you. Now, if you've got a perfect life, you were born with a spoon in your mouth, you never had to grapple for anything, you've always had more than enough finances than you ever needed. You've always had the best relationships and never had any drama in your relationships. Everything at your job has always been nothing but promotion, promotion, promotion. You get whatever you want. If that's you, this might not be for you. But for the rest of us, who sometimes are not even able to articulate ways that may seem unfair, I know that as Christians, we often want to say that everything's great, even when it doesn't feel that way. Even if we don't speak what we see as unfair, if we sense that something is unfair, this message is for you. If somebody treats you in a way that's unfair, if you've experienced something that is unfair, this is for you. And if you have the opportunity, whether it's Bible that's in front of you or one that you brought with you, I want to encourage you to take a look at Genesis chapter 16 as we consider unfair but not finished. I'll be reading out of the NIV. Now, Sarai, Abram's wife, had borne him no children. Here we are, already unfair. But she had an Egyptian slave named Hagar. Verse 2. So she said to Abram, "The Lord has kept me from having children. Go, sleep with my slave. Perhaps I can build a family through her." Abram agreed to what Sarah said. Verse 3, so after Abram had been living in Canaan 10 years, Sarai, his wife, took her Egyptian slave Hagar and gave her to her husband to be his wife. I hope you see this story. As we consider unfair but not finished, the person who I want to focus on from this perspective is not Abram, later to become Abraham. It's not Sarai, later to become Sarah. It is someone who found herself in a situation that in and of itself seems unfair. Hagar. Now, brothers, if it's uncomfortable for you to imagine yourself in Hagar's shoes because she's a woman, welcome to the club. Now, my seminary friends know that I made a presentation once about Pocahontas, where I displayed myself as Pocahontas, and they laughed at me hysterically because I said, I am Pocahontas. They just thought it was hilarious for me to express myself as Pocahontas. So if you ever see somebody call me Pocahontas, just know they're laughing hysterically at me because I depicted myself as Pocahontas. But so often, we regularly depict male patriarchal figures and expect women to simply go along with the boat. So this morning, brothers, I'm encouraging you to go along with the boat because we're looking at things this morning through Hagar's eyes. She's a woman, she's an Egyptian, and she's a slave. It does not mean that the Bible is condoning slavery. It does mean that the situation that she finds herself in is unfair. It could be that she was born into the legacy of being the child of Pharaoh and having seen Abram and his wife Sarai and how God had blessed them and chose to leave an idolatrous family and system and decided to follow the ones that Jehovah was blessing. It could be that this woman decided to leave Pharaoh, to leave being a princess, and to choose to follow Sarai and Abraham and to become a part of this family dynamic and willingly entered into servanthood to her mistress, Sarai. That could be true, or she might have been born in an unfair situation that went from bad to worse, and now she finds herself without a word to be able to express what she wants, where Abraham and Sarah, at this point, Abram and Sarai, are choosing for her what to do. So what did Hagar do? Verse 4 says, he slept with Hagar, and she conceived. First thing that Hagar did was she reacted. For us to be able to learn from Hagar, I want us to recognize and understand what it means to react. I mean, it was the culture of the day. Culture said, Sarai, you don't have a child, so just take your handmaid and give her to your slave. Let her have a child, and then you can call that your child. Now, if I wanted to be inappropriate, we would start venturing through a modern day television series called Handmaid's Tales. And while I may encourage you to take a look at it if you so dare, I'm not getting ready to preach us through Handmaid's Tales because there's a whole lot of inappropriate illustrations in that depiction that does give us some insight into what this handmaid Hagar was facing. She was a slave. And the powerful were choosing for her to do what she had no choice about, so it seemed. Verse 4, he slept with Hagar, and she conceived. She didn't ask him to sleep with her. She didn't request that he sleep with her. Her mistress, Sarai, said it should be so, and so it was. That was unfair. And her response was not only to get pregnant, but to react. The B part of verse 4 says, when she knew she was pregnant, she began to despise her mistress. That word despise means, in the original language, to be trifling, of little account. Exodus 21:17 talks about how, using the same word, but in the English it's different, anyone who curses their father or mother should be put to death. That's how serious it is to be that way towards another person. If you're a child and you curse your mother or father, you're supposed to be put to death. Well, here's a slave who disrespected her mistress so much in her reaction. She was reacting. Let me use an illustration I can use in mixed company. It is one of my favorite movies, The Pursuit of Happiness. It's an incredible movie from 2006. And if you haven't seen it, I encourage you to check it out. Although you're probably going to have to pay to watch it because I don't know anything that it's streaming on for free. But in The Pursuit of Happiness, there's a true story about a man named Chris Gardner. And he found himself going from being broke to being a manager of wealth, and it turned out pretty good. And there's a scene in that movie. It's a great scene. It involves basketball. And his 5-year-old son, even though his real son was 2, but in the movie, Will Smith played Christopher Gardner, and his son was 5, and they were just having a good time out on the basketball court, playing on the basketball court. The son was dribbling, having a good time. He was shooting. His dad took the ball, and the son said, man, I'm going to go pro. And then he said, you know, your dad wasn't too good at this game. And then he shoots. It goes over the backboard. And he's like, see what I mean? I wasn't very good at this. I'm just telling you, there might be some things that you'll be good at, but this probably isn't going to be one of them. Your dad wasn't good at it. You're probably not going to be that good at it. There's going to be some other things that you can be good at, but basketball is probably not one of them. And then you see him give the ball back to his son, and his son takes the ball, drops it, and he walks off the court. He tries to put it in his bag, and he's depressed. He went from being excited and energized and full of hopes and dreams to having his dreams dashed because his dad said what he couldn't do. And when his dad looked at what he had said and what he had done to his son and saw how devastated his son was because of the discouragement he just spoke into his life, he leaned on the fence and he said, don't you ever let anybody tell you what you can't do, even if it's me. Whatever dreams you have, whatever you desire, whatever you hope for, whatever you long for, sometimes people tell you stuff you can't do because of what they can't do. He had reacted. He had responded, and so often we find ourselves reacting to how people treat us. When things are unfair and we react to what it is that they do, we find ourselves, like Chris Gardner's son, feeling depressed, feeling sad, and we react in ways that aren't necessarily appropriate. And that's what Hagar did. She reacted. Some of us react in ways that are inappropriate to communication. There's a book entitled Crucial Conversations. And it says that sometimes rather than being involved in conversation and talking to one another and talking through the problems, sometimes we resort to defense mechanisms, specifically silence or violence. We either get quiet and don't deal with it. We start calling names, pointing fingers, and doing all types of things. But neither one of those is an appropriate reaction. Another way that's not an appropriate reaction is when a child gets angry because of what their parents do. They may seek emancipation. In other words, they just want to divorce their parents and basically say, they're not my parents anymore, I'm just going to live this life by myself. But part of the problem with that is parents are supposed to raise their children. They're supposed to pour into their children. They're supposed to guide their children. They're supposed to mold and teach their children. And when a child reacts in a way that's inappropriate, rather than just for a moment temporarily thinking they're going to run away, if they go all the way through with emancipation, that does not end well. What did Hagar do? She reacted. When we react, we can get into a lot of trouble, brothers and sisters. When we react and it's not right, it can take us where God would not want us to go. What did Hagar do? She reacted. What else did Hagar do? She ran. Verse 5, and Sarah said to Abram, you are responsible for the wrong I am suffering. This is Sarah speaking. I put my slave in your arms, and now that she knows she's pregnant, she despises me. May the Lord judge between you and me. Verse 6, your slave is in your hands, Abram said. Do with her whatever you think best. Then Sarai mistreated Hagar, so she fled from her. Not only did Hagar react, she also ran. Now, I don't know if you've ever heard this saying, but two wrongs don't make a right. Just because somebody treats you badly, and Sarai treated Hagar badly, but her response was to run. Brothers and sisters, two wrongs don't make a right. The Arabic verb for this fleeting is to migrate. It's what birds do when they go to a whole different place. Fight or flight is natural. That's our natural response. When we find ourselves fearing, we often decide, you can look at nature and see how things often go. It's either fight or flight, and she flew. She ran. Exodus 2:15, the same word is used. And then again in Exodus 14:5, the same word is used, where Pharaoh was so mad at Moses, he was ready to kill him. And he fled away from Pharaoh. And the Egyptians got so angry at the Israelites because they had fled and all their free labor was now gone. And so sometimes this running is used to totally depart from an area. And it's exactly, unfortunately, what happened at the beginning of the movie. Chris Gardner's wife, when the going got tough, you know what she did? She fled. She ran. In real life, this man and this son who were struggling financially to be able to make it, right when a couple needs to come together and stick it out and make it work, she left her husband and her son to fend for themselves. She ran. It's a really sad moment in the movie. It bothers me every single time because what is the point of saying the vows if when it gets difficult, we give up? What is the point in families if as soon as things get challenging, we walk away? What is the point of having a friend if when things get hard, we just walk away? What is the point of having a church if when times get difficult, we just walk away? I recognize that we often react to things that are difficult because they seem unfair. But if our response is not only to react, but also to run, we find ourselves in Hagar's place. Not only did she react, not only did she run, but verse 9 indicates that she returned. Verse 7, the angel of the Lord found Hagar near a spring in the desert. It was the spring that is beside the road to Shur. And he said, Hagar, slave of Sarai, where have you come from and where are you going? I'm running away from my mistress Sarai, she answered. The angel of the Lord told her, go back to your mistress and submit to her. He told her after she reacted and after she'd run to return. This idea of returning is not an easy thing to consider. The idea of returning after you've reacted, it's kind of embarrassing. The idea of returning after you've run, it's definitely embarrassing. The idea of returning after we've reacted and run, let me help us with the word regarding return. It has direction associated with it. And brothers and sisters, when we return, this word is a relate to God. Means we're either going to turn to him or away from him. If you turn away from God, that's becoming apostate. That is leaving the church. That is leaving your family. That is leaving your loved ones. That's leaving the one who created you, who cares for you, who loves you even when you don't feel loved, and even when he seems distant. To turn away from him is to turn apostate. And so often, we want to go with the culture. We want to do what seems popular. We want to do what seems culturally appropriately that is against God. And we turn away from him because that's how we react. And so we run and turn away from God. But here's Hagar being confronted with God, who is informing her to return. And that does not mean turn away from God. It means turn to God. The opposite of apostate, turning away from God, is to repent, turn towards God. Returning is something we all do. The question is it to ourselves and what we want, or is it to God and what he wants? The other reason why it's difficult to return is not only because we sometimes want to go apostate, turn from God, rather than turning to God and repenting. But there's another word in that text that many of us do not like. The angel of the Lord said to her, go back, that's returning, to your mistress and see, some of us don't even want to say it. It's right there in the text. The angel of God told her, go back to your mistress and submit to her. We want to be in charge. We want to do what we want to do. We don't want to turn to God. We want to turn away from God, because if we turn away from God, we can do whatever we want to do. We can be free. But that's not true freedom. Turning to God rather than reacting. Turning to God rather than running from him. Returning also includes submission. He told Hagar to submit to Sarai. Submit to Sarai? Sarai had been mean to her. Sarai had been inappropriate to her. Watch Handmaid's Tales if you want to. It was horrible the way they treated the handmaids. And what gets celebrated year after year in Jewish Purim is an understanding of this. The idea of submit, the word in the original language is in the Hiphil imperative. It is the actor of the action acting on themselves. I'll say it again. It's the actor of the action acting on themselves. Meaning, I submit. You can't do it for me. I submit. I make me submit. And whenever we submit as a part of returning, it's an action we have to do. It does not matter what Sarai did. It does not matter what your employer did if you're the employee. It does not matter what your employee did if you're the employer. It doesn't matter what your spouse did if you're the spouse. It doesn't matter what another person did that treated you badly. The actor does the action to themselves in submission. It's being willing to bow down despite the other person having done wrong, despite you having done wrong, despite it being uncomfortable, despite it feeling inappropriate. It is submission. And it's what we're called to do. Every year, Jews celebrate Purim because just like in Esther 9:25, exactly what Haman, his plot did, they're excited about the fact that they're celebrating that God allowed it to come down on his own head. The very same thing, an actor doing an action that came back on himself. Haman wanted all the Jews to be exterminated. And it came back on him. And it came back on his sons. And they lost their lives, even though he wanted all the Jews to die. Haman was hung on his very own gallows that he had for others. You might have heard it said, watch the bridges that you burn, because you might need them on your way back. Salvation is a choice. After you've reacted, after you've run, you have the opportunity to return. And salvation is saying that I accept what he, Jesus Christ, has done for me because I am a sinner. Romans 3:23, all have sinned and come short of the glory of God. Romans 6:23, the wages of sin is death, but the gift of God is eternal life through Jesus Christ our Lord. Jesus paid it all. And all to him I owe. Salvation is a free gift that cost him everything. It cost God the Father his only begotten Son. It cost the Son his life, and he endured excruciating pain for you and for me so that we could return to God by accepting him into our lives, and that is salvation. It's not about, I got to get older, I got to get it right. You can be old and accept him. It doesn't mean that, okay, I'm in the middle of this thing and I'm kind of starting to work some things out. You can be middle-aged and you can accept him. It doesn't mean I have to wait until I get older, until I get my license, until I get to be 21 and I can drink, or until I can do all these other things. You can be a child and accept him. Salvation is a choice. It means you've chosen to turn to God, who loves you so much that he wants a relationship with you. And rather than just reacting to whatever the world chooses to do, rather than running whatever direction you want to go, you're choosing not to run from him, but to him and return home. Christopher Gardner was able to go from being an intern to being an insightful business leader and able to do some absolutely wonderful and magnificent things financially. And not only is salvation a choice that any of us can choose, baptism is a choice that we can choose, church membership is a choice that we can choose. If you're not saved, you can choose to be saved today. If you've not been baptized, you can choose to be baptized. If you're not a member of the church, you can choose to be a member of the church. Church membership is a choice. The prodigal son isn't about what he did while he was gone. It's about the loving arms of the Father, willing to take him in when he returned home. And his father was standing there with outstretched arms to receive him to himself. I want to encourage you to return. No matter what has been unfair in your life, if you still have breath, you have the opportunity to return. Everything up until this point may have seemed unfair, but it's not finished. That child of the Great Depression who was born in 1930, who had an unfair situation that he was born into, who had a mother who scolded he and his sister to the point of sobbing. You might have heard of him. His name is Warren Buffett, and he is now one of the richest people on the face of the planet. I can't promise you riches in this world, but if you'll make the right choice, if rather than reacting, if rather than running, if you'll return to him, he wants to receive